I want you to turn your Bibles with me again today to the book of Philippians. Philippians, we're still mining the depths of this particular book to discern what it is that gives us unchained joy. Can you have joy in the midst of this world? Is it possible to know this internal peace? Is it no matter what's going on? And this week has been a week of for our family. We've learned about a real tragic death of a good friend of ours who basically ran sound for our wedding when Deb and I were married, and he just basically had, they don't know exactly what happened, but the clot ended up in his brain, and father of 3 children, he's 48 years old, and he's in heaven. He's with Jesus. And that family is going to have to process that. Is it possible, is it right to have joy in those settings? Sometimes you can look at those settings, and individuals who have joy just seems really out of place. You're supposed to be way more broken. But it's possible in Jesus Christ to know that that brother is with the Lord, even though we're going to miss life with him, that in fact the biggest battle of all has been won in the name of Jesus. He is not suffering in hell for eternity. He has been saved. He's been rescued. The family's going to go through the grief, the very normal, natural grief of that, but they do not have the grief of being hopeless. That's a deep kind of grief. That's a grief without hope is as deep as there's no way to console a heart without hope. But in these settings, and so Paul, the apostle, has written about a variety of circumstances that he has encountered, and he's speaking out of that reservoir of discomfort to say that you can have joy, and he's speaking to this church of Philippi that he founded several hundred miles away. And he says in Philippians chapter 2, he says in verse 16, hold firmly to the message of life, which is another way of describing the gospel. In other words, hold firmly to it. That is, take your stand. Basically, this particular passage of Scripture has been, you are to live out a life that resembles and displays the fact that the gospel, the good news about trusting Jesus and the transformation that happens, it ought to be seen in your life. And frankly, you need to hold on to that, because that particular awareness, that particular set of truths that are really be on the forefront of your mind, pain and suffering and discomfort and unhappiness or circumstances in life can begin to remove your connection, your closeness to those truths that are meant to be anchoring to you and to me. And that's what pain does, and that's what fear does, and that's what anxiety. The root word for anxiety is the word divide. A divided mind is an anxious mind. It's separate from truth or separate from reality in some ways, or it's separate from you try to speak to someone who's in anxiety. You're trying to give them the truth, and they hear what you say, but these other things, these other lies, or these other feelings or impressions are battling that particular truth, and they can't get settled with it, and it's a restless life of anxiety. And he says joy is something that's available to us as believers, but we have to actively hold on to it. We have to actively pursue the truths and continue to live out in our life, in our confession, that in fact we believe them. So he says, hold firmly to the message of life. Then I can boast in the day of Christ that I didn't run or labor for nothing. Now this is kind of encouraging to me in some ways, because as a minister, he's basically saying, I feel like I've put everything out there. He's going to say in the next chapter, I've discarded everything that really meant something to me. I traveled thousands of miles at great cost. I suffered personally to proclaim God the Son, Jesus Christ, as the Messiah, as the Savior. I've spent nights in jail, in prison. I've been beaten. I've been flogged. I've been stoned. And then ultimately I've stood before powerful people, and now they've got me in a prison, so to speak. And I'm chained to a soldier. I don't have mobility. And ultimately, my particular experience is being written off by a good part of the church of Jesus Christ, who doesn't understand what I'm going through fully. So he says, out of that, I feel like I made a full-on effort to be sure I got the gospel to you, and it was implanted in you. And it is, as I face the day of Christ, as I face the day in which I'm going to give an account to Jesus Christ for the ministry that he gave to me, I do not want to find out in the end that I labored and I ran in vain. You say, how is that even possible? Why would the apostle even say that if it wasn't possible? He's saying, I've run like crazy. I've labored like crazy to ensure that your faith would be alive and you would be active. But he said there's some things going on in the Philippian church that you've really got to take root of what really matters. You've got to take root of what ultimately is an anchoring truth. Because I see in some ways, and you go back to the early passage of Scripture, I see in some ways there's some of you who are more interested in your own interest than the interest of God. I see in some ways that you've allowed pride to function in you as a Philippian church. And I had to go back and remind you that greatness isn't about how great you are, it's really how humble you are. And I had to show you the image of Jesus. That in fact, when you choose humility, you don't diminish your Christian character at all. And Jesus is the big display of that. We found out last week there's grumbling and arguing taking place in the church. He's basically saying, I did a lot to be sure that you would live out a way that was worthy of the gospel, but there's some things that are taking place that are minimizing the glow, the light, even, he says, the stars, the glow of the stars that's meant to be there for you and for the community around you isn't quite as bright. It isn't quite as bright. So he says, hold on firmly to the message of life. So one day I can boast, not in myself. He's saying I'm not going to brag on me, but so I can boast in what God, Jesus, you did in the lives of those that I ministered to. He's talking about the day of Christ. He's talking about the day of the Lord. He's talking about a moment in which he stands before Jesus Christ to be rewarded for his labor, his work. In another letter, Paul says it's going to go like this. He's not saying it's actually going to go like this, but in his understanding of things, it's going to go like this. As a minister of the gospel, he's going to stand before Jesus, and Jesus is going to basically say, there in front of you is all of your works on behalf of me. Some are made out of wood, some are made out of hay, and yet some in the mix of that pile of works is some precious stones that are not going to be damaged by fire. But Jesus is going to say, I'm going to put everything you did to some assessment, and then I'm going to reward you for what remains. Now that's pretty heavy for a minister to accept, because I like bonfires, okay? I grew up with bonfires and marshmallows and all that. It's a fun place to be around. But when you stand before Jesus Christ and he puts it all on the ground and says, this is everything you did in my name, I'm going to put some fire to it and see what's left, that's a little unnerving. And Paul says that potential is there for me as a minister, meaning I ministered hard, I ministered well, I felt like I ministered in the way that Jesus would have me to minister, but the real boast is, did you continue in the faith? The real boast is, did you, when you stated your trust and faith in Jesus Christ, when I declared the gospel, are you continuing to live out fully the gospel? So Paul's not standing there fearing for his eternal security. He belongs to Jesus. Jesus belongs to him. We're talking about rewards, and he's saying, I could stand there one day, and I really want to be able to say, you see those green emeralds, and you see those gems, and you see that gold over there? That's Philippi. That's what you did through me in the gospel. That's what you raised up, and the fire has tested it, and it's remained. Instead of like, what is that especially large flame over there? Oh, those pieces of wood, that's Philippi. You got them started, you gave them some of the gospel, and yet they in their hearts did not respond fully. And so something of eternal value has not ultimately resulted through their lives. Paul says, I want to boast. In contrast, I don't want to be ashamed. I want to boast about you. I want to boast in Jesus. But I think sometimes we do. We have this idea that, yeah, when we came to Christ and we wanted to follow him, and we did, and we were changed and saved by him, that there was nothing for us to do. And frankly, the hardest thing you could do in life is follow Jesus. If that's a new thought to you, it needs to be a new thought to you. Holding on to the truths of the gospel in a world and in a situation that's constantly trying to berate what you hold on to as truth. Constantly trying to calm your flame down. Constantly trying to minimize your voice. It takes a choice of faith and energy to continue to persevere. And he says, hold on to. He's not using the word, why don't you just squeeze your fingers? He's talking about a grip. He's talking about grasp. Hold on to the truth, the word of life. Hold on to it. It's a way of saying stand strong for the word of life. Verse 17, he says, but even if I'm poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you. In the same way, you should also be glad and rejoice with me. Paul said, I see your service. I received it. You had a messenger bring good news and bring finances to me that I needed. I hear about some of the ministry that's going on with you, and ultimately it's something to celebrate. But Paul says it could be that my particular role may be just to simply be a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith. We don't know what a drink offering is because we never do a drink offering. We drink, we eat. But in the scriptures, in the Old Testament particularly, there were drink offerings. They would be drink offerings of some sort of oil or some sort of mixture that would be on basically the animal offering that was basically provided to cover sin. Innocent life was being taken in exchange for my sin, and that's a particular Old Testament economy. And I would basically put my hands on that altar, and I'd say, this life is dying, it's shedding its blood, it's pouring its life out for me. But in the midst of that would be a praise offering or something that would actually just simply say praise to God. It would be either poured on the offering or poured on the side. It's called a drink offering. Paul says, I want you to know, even in your service to Jesus Christ, it could be that I become just a drink offering to you. I pour out my life. And he's saying, I may lose my life in the near future. And if that's a particular role, I want you to rejoice the fact that I finished well, but I want you to rejoice in the fact that I am a drink offering for your good offering of faith and service to Jesus. He says, I want you to rejoice with me. I rejoice in you, and I want you to rejoice in me. Understand, we are both following Jesus. We are both living out our commitment for Jesus. You all the way back in Philippi, and me in Rome. You're living it out in hardship, perhaps, and declaring the gospel in your setting. I'm waiting to get the verdict from Caesar as to whether I'm going to live or die. We're both serving Jesus. You may continue to live out in your service for Jesus. I may die and function just simply like a peace offering poured out over yours, accenting yours, essentially recognizing, essentially lifting that service in praise and worship to Jesus. This is Paul's perspective. This is what gives him joy. What gives him joy is very much like the Apostle John. The Apostle John writes, he says, nothing gives me more joy than to know that my children are walking in the truth. When you're a spiritual leader and you're basically responsible for individuals who may have gotten started in the gospel or started in the faith or being worked in used to develop them and disciple them in the faith, there is nothing more encouraging if you continue to walk in the faith as a spiritual leader to know that somewhere along the line, some of your actions, some of your words, some of your time actually translated into a changed life. And believers like us who have been recipients of so much discipleship and encouragement, we have to ask ourselves, are we really living out our life consistent with the amount of discipleship and spiritual nurture we've been given? Some of us ought to be superheroes, right? Some of us ought to be Wonder Woman and Captain America spiritually. We have been so fed. We've had so much ministry put in between our parents, perhaps, small group leaders, deacons and their families, pastors. We have so much put into us. We really ought to be men and women of faith. God, just use me. Help me to serve in some way ultimately. I'm a recipient of the ministry of this individual who's one day going to stand before you, Jesus. And I want when he or she stands before you to give an account of their spiritual ministry, I want basically the flame to just kind of disappear around me. I want to be gold. I want to be jewels. I want to be rubies. I want the reward. I want that individual to receive reward. Because they made a difference in my life. And I've got a collection of names all down through my life. I can almost pretty much chart the timeline of my life with individuals who every step of the way had some sort of influence in my life. So I'm not just standing here doing what I'm doing just simply to hold on for my own personal self. I'm the recipient of a bunch of folks who put their life in me, who I want to, when they actually stand before Jesus, I want to say, they say, what's that little ruby over there? A little small one, a little sharp one. Oh, that's Jonathan. That's your brother Jonathan. I don't know what his new name is in heaven, but that was his. He kept the faith. He kept moving. He kept preaching the gospel. He kept seeking to live it. He had to live it out. Someone say, yeah, that's the mission. So some of us have got to remember a little more where we were and who it was that touched our lives and what faithfulness ought to look like as recipients of that. Now, he gives us two examples. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. He gives us two examples of individuals that the Apostle Paul has influenced for faithfulness. Verse 19, he says, "Now I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I also may be encouraged when I hear news about you. For I have no one else like-minded who will genuinely care about your interest. All seek their own interest, but not those of Jesus Christ. But you know his proven character, because he has served with me in the gospel ministry like a son with a father. Therefore I hope to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. I'm convinced in the Lord that I myself will also come quickly." He says, let me lift up to you and honor this gentleman named Timothy. Timothy came to know Jesus through Paul's second missionary journey. He was a lost individual. He accepted the truth of the gospel, and he began to travel with Paul immediately. He began to experience all that Paul experienced, even persecution, even words, even loss. And Timothy's with Paul in this house arrest situation. He says, I hope to send Timothy to you. In other words, I hope that I can actually send him to you with the announcement that I'm on the way, that I'm coming behind him. I feel like God's going to help me get through this predicament, and ultimately I will see you face to face. But let me tell you who Timothy is. Let me tell you what faithfulness looks like. I've mentored him. I put my life into him. I've taught him. I've been an example for him. He says this about Timothy, verse 20, I have no one else like-minded who will genuinely care about your interest. All seek their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. Paul the Apostle says, let me tell you what leadership looks like in my particular arena. Leadership spiritually, those that really have caught the gospel and have caught the nature of my mission as the Apostle Paul, is their interest has to become the church's. They have to be individuals who think about the church, who are concerned about the church, who pray over the church believers. They think about their good. They think about their ill. They think about whether or not things are going well or not. Their interest is primarily set up in caring for the church. And Paul says, you know why that's so significant? Because that's Jesus' focus. If you want to know what Jesus is concerned about, what his focus is in heaven, it's all about the church. The people of God. It's all about you. There's so much that we're concerned of, and we think that maybe he's concerned. Our TV kind of flickers a little. That kind of troubles us. Our car starts making a noise. Our kids kind of misbehave. Yeah, that's all part of this life. Jesus, his concern is growing and building and maturing and one day receiving a body of believers, the church of God, to himself one day. And in the practical sense, he knows the church continues to live and exist and declare the gospel in a setting that can be very, very difficult to maintain. Jesus' interest is, I gave you Paul. I called him into ministry, and Paul says, I brought somebody else along who's going to be a successor for me. His name is Timothy. And Timothy would succeed Paul. He would live further than Paul. He would pastor the church in Ephesus beyond Paul after his death. But he says, you know him. You know his character. He says, I don't have anybody who loves you like Timothy. And I want to send him to you. I want him to come there and bless you. I want him to send good news. He has served like a son to a father in the gospel ministry. I want to send him to bless you. I want to send someone to you that when he shows up, you just know ultimately you're receiving someone from me who is specifically qualified to encourage you and build you up in the faith. Why? Because he's a faithful man. He's paid the price. He's endured everything I've endured, Paul would say. And I don't have anybody else like him right now. And I want to send him. But there's somebody else I need to send because I am not being released yet. So he goes on to verse 25. But I considered it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, fellow soldier, as well as your messenger and minister to my need. Since he has been longing for all of you all and was distressed because you heard that he was sick. Indeed, he was so sick that he nearly died. However, God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so I would not have one grief on top of another. For this reason, I'm very eager to send him so that you may rejoice when you see him again, and I may be less anxious. Therefore, welcome him in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in honor, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me. He says, I want to send Timothy because you know him and you know his reputation, you know his character. You know how he ultimately is the one who is a specific partner to me in the ministry. But you sent me Epaphroditus, and oh, by the way, halfway there he got really sick. He not only got really, really sick, essentially he came very close to dying, and that's literally what it says. He was on death's door. He was knocking. And Paul said, you know why he went through all that? You know why he did that? You know why he persevered even in his sickness? And why he came and brought a message from you and he brought a gift from you? Because he was doing it for Christ. So you want to know what spiritual vitality, you want to know what spiritual commitment, spiritual service that ultimately is a sacrifice to the Lord looks like? It looks like Timothy, who has this reputation of service. He's endured everything. Paul would say, I've endured. But look at Epaphroditus. This is an individual who just sent on an errand. He would get on a ship for part of his journey, probably got sick on the ship, got off the ship, told somebody off the ship just to go back and tell the church that he was just deathly ill. He still made the effort to get to Paul to deliver the gift of money and the encouragement that they desperately wanted Paul to have. He did that on behalf of the church, but he did it for Jesus. He said he's my brother. He's a co-worker. He's a partner in ministry. He's a fellow soldier in the fight. He's a messenger. He's a minister to my need. He's been here ultimately to encourage me. He was the sick one, almost died, and he's still offering ministry to me. And I'm going to send him back because you knew he was sick, because you're concerned about him, and I want him to go back to you, and I want him to be a cause of joy for you. But when you get him back, honor him. Honor men like him, who for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of Christ risked their comfort, risked their very life to carry out the ministry that had been given to them. Paul says something very interesting, verse 30. He says he came close to death for the work of Christ. He came close to death for the work of Christ. I don't know that I've ever come close to death for the work of Christ. I've knocked on doors. I found out that that's some of the most dangerous missionary work you can do, particularly when a little chain runs off the edge of the deck, and it goes underneath a hole between the slatting. And it doesn't take long for you to figure out. There may be no sign or anything. You're just knocking on the door, and while you're knocking, you're just watching that chain go across the porch down underneath. And in those kind of sittings, they only have pit bulls. It's never a poodle, okay? It's never a chihuahua that comes out underneath. What is that? Or a dash hound, or some sleepy dog that's just kind of coming out looking up at you. No, it's just you see teeth before you see anything else. And you grab your track and you just, as you go, and you just let it just flitter. That's about as close to a life or death circumstance as I've ever come. And I'm still here to tell the story. I may have wounds in other places and part of my body, but other than that, that was as close as I've come. This guy literally made the journey, and it was going to cost him his life. But Paul says he did it for the work of Christ. And you know why he did it? He said, risking his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me. Now, this is an interesting thought here. Paul was basically saying this guy laid down his life almost to deliver a ministry that Jesus had put on your hearts toward me. It was a ministry of words, a letter, but it was also a financial sacrificial gift that you put together as a church. And led by Jesus Christ, it was put together in Philippi, and it was entrusted to Epaphroditus to get to me. And Epaphroditus made the decision, I'm going to get that ministry, which is basically initiated from the Philippian church, I'm going to get that to the Apostle Paul no matter what. And in doing that, it completed, it made up what they was lacking. In other words, there was something they perhaps had promised, something they had committed to the Apostle Paul, and it hadn't happened yet. And they put it together, and Epaphroditus was the delivery guy to actually make up what was lacking in their ministry to him. In other words, you kept your word. You kept your love. You compiled your sacrificial gifts of finances, and you put it into Epaphroditus' hands, and he realized that he got off the boat sick, that if he didn't make it there alive, that ministry would not be completed. And he chose to exert beyond the normal to get there, and it almost cost him his life. And Paul says, thanks be to God, he had mercy. He had mercy on me. I knew he was sick, and that grieved me badly. But for him to die after this great sickness would have been a double dose of grief. And God had mercy, and thankfully he healed Epaphroditus somehow. We don't know, but he was restored. And that particular teaching right there, that thinking there kind of stirred me, because I said, I wonder if Jesus, I wonder in my commitment to you personally to follow you as Lord and Savior, I wonder what's lacking in my ministry to you. I wonder what it is you thought you were going to get out of my life and put into my life that would show up in ministry that has yet to show up. Whether that's time, whether that's energy, whether that's finances. What sacrifice, what is it that you thought that you were going to put into my life that you have yet to see pay off? You've yet to see me ministering and serving in a sacrificial, joyful way that in fact is resourced in what you placed in my life. And I throw that out to you, for all of us as a church. Every one of the Church of Jesus Christ, we're recipients of the gospel and the goodness of all in Jesus Christ. What is lacking? What could you be doing that you know that Jesus might want you to do or might be leading you to do? What could you give that in fact, yeah, I could give that, but it would mean some sort of sacrifice in some ways, but I just haven't been able to cross that bridge yet with my faith. Or what about spiritual service? What about your spiritual gifts and your calling and your enablings that we need as a church family, perhaps in our children's area or youth area or adults area, whatever the ministry might be, that you have this gift in store, but it's not being displayed yet. It's not being fruitful. It's not being made fire-worthy. Yeah, we got to go all the way back and look at Jesus in the face and say, thank you for all that you've given to me, but down away from Jesus, back away from Jesus, and I think you'll start to see some faces of some individuals who put a lot of life and a lot of love and a lot of discipleship and a lot of companionship and perhaps trust. They put a lot in you spiritually to where we are today, and it's a good place. It's a good place. And maybe the motivation is, Jesus, I need to serve you with that, or maybe the motivation is, when that individual who's been kind of a spiritual leader, man or woman in my life, stands before Jesus, I really don't want the room to get real hot. I really don't want wood, hay, and stubble to be all that they've got going. I really want gold, silver, precious stones, jewels that'll refine in the fire. I really want them to be rewarded for their holding of the faith and of their perseverance in my life. Either motivation, I think, is holy. You do it for Jesus, or ultimately you do it because you've been entrusted with a gift. Paul says he risked his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me. And Paul received that gift, and he was like, yes. They kept their word. They followed through. And that blessing to me is a blessing to them. And ultimately, when I stand before Christ, it's just going to be wonderful. To you, it's going to be a kind of a pouring out offering. Yeah, I'm going to lose my life, but it's going to be basically an accent to a life of service that you're rendering to Jesus. But the joy is I get to be there and I get to boast about you one day. I get to boast about you by name because you're holding on to the faith. I don't know how you will apply this. I've provided a couple different thoughts, and the Spirit can just take our minds and apply spiritually where we are. I've told you a little of my journey. I'm just doing a little inventory, and I want the Spirit to do an inventory of my soul. What's been placed in me? What's been given to me by faith? What expectations really, Jesus, not guilt, not shame, but what expectations do you have of what's been rendered in my life? What's been given to you? And how does he want you to display that? When we do, it will be worthy of the gospel. That's Paul's thing. I want you to be worthy, live a life worthy of the gospel. It's a giving life, a loving life, a sharing life, a generous life. I pray that would be our experience. Father God, I thank you for your son Jesus. This time of year, we just kind of all get engineered around this word Thanksgiving. I pray that, and we as believers understand that it's a every day, every hour desire of our hearts just to express our thanks to you, O God, the giver of all good gifts. But I pray that our thanksgiving and our gratitude isn't just simply words. It's recognizing that when you've given us of yourself and you placed your Spirit in us, and then you give us other spiritual leaders and mentors in life and the Scripture itself that are meant to produce, they're meant to bring out a service, a sacrificial ministry that is pleasing to you, Jesus. It's not about guilt and shame and being motivated by loss, but it's ultimately just saying there is an expectation in your heart, Jesus, that what you have given us, you want to see flourish. You want to see grow. You want to see mature. You want to see it lived out, not only for the health and the strength of this local church fellowship, but you want it to be seen by those who have yet to receive the good news of Jesus Christ by faith. You desire to continue to add to your family through us. What a privilege it is to be stewards of the gospel. Let's search our souls. Like Paul said about Timothy, it is possible to be so distracted that our interests do not even resemble yours, Jesus. They are somewhere else. Our heads and our hearts are somewhere else. Our interest isn't here with the things that you care about, Jesus. Refocus us. Help us make the exchanges. Help us to say yes and no. Whatever it is that's just taking our time and our attention, may we trade it for better. That personal, ongoing, sacrificial relationship of faith and service to you. Meet the need of our hearts today, we pray. In Jesus, your name, I ask all this. Amen.